No, Philip Fraser sharp like a razor. Saying I strong. Saying Philip Fraser says, I have never let it go. Hey.
I strong, big up yourself, quote the melody say. Big up the positive vibration. I strong radio. Deal!
Back in the days. Dignitary stylish, what?
Yeah, man, it's all about DJ Mickey and I Strong. Real foundation. Dignitary says, Spagalobalaba, Spagalobalaba, Spagaloba, Spagalobalaba, Spagalobalaba. Right there. Just send me come. I just send me come. Just send me come. I just send me come. Anyway, now box throws.
Top of the moment to you folks. Welcome to the channel. Please remember to like, share, subscribe, and all that good stuff here on Positive Vibrations YouTube channel. Also remember to visit the Positive Vibrations Network by clicking on the description or scanning the QR code. Positive Vibrations Radio. Help us to build. Like, share, subscribe. Blessings.
Welcome. Sankofa before repatriation to Africa. Repatriation, or back to Africa, is an important concept for all diasporan Africans to explore and is one that has become popular in recent years, especially with Ghana's year of return in 2019. However, before one attempt to repatriate physically, it's a must for one to repatriate mentally in order to have a holistic understanding of ancient African traditions and civilizations. The concept of Sankofa, an Akan word from Ghana, encourages individuals to reach back and reclaim their past in order to move forward. Sankofa before repatriation to Africa emphasizes the importance of unlearning what has been learned from colonizers and relearning from an African perspective. This approach challenges the notion that simply blackwashing information is enough and asserts that it is imperative to validate African concepts without applying European logic. This essay will explore the historical context, key figures, the impact of Sankofa before repatriation to Africa, and influential individuals who have contributed to this field. It will also discuss various perspectives and provide a well-reasoned analysis, covering both positive and negative aspects, while considering potential future developments related to Sankofa before repatriation to Africa. Historical context. The historical context of Sankofa before repatriation to Africa is deeply rooted in the legacy of colonization and its profound impact on the African continent. For centuries, European powers engaged in the exploitation, subjugation, and dehumanization of African peoples through the transatlantic slave trade, colonialism, and the imposition of foreign cultures and ideologies. As a result, generations of Africans were subjected to the erasure and distortion of their history, culture, and knowledge systems. The effects of this oppressive legacy continue to shape the experiences and perspectives of people of African descent around the world today. In response to this historical context, Sankofa before repatriation to Africa advocates for a critical reevaluation of the knowledge, values, and beliefs that have been passed down through generations. It challenges the internalized narratives of inferiority, the acceptance of Eurocentric worldviews, and the perpetuation of cultural alienation. Instead, it calls for a return to the authentic African heritage, wisdom, and spirituality as a source of empowerment, healing, and liberation. By unlearning the colonial mindset and relearning from an African perspective, individuals can reclaim their identity, agency, and sovereignty. This process is essential for the restoration of dignity, self-determination, and unity within the global African community. Key figures. Several key figures have played a pivotal role in advancing the principles of Sankofa before repatriation to Africa. Among them is Dr. Maulana Karenga, a prominent scholar, activist, and creator of the Nguzo Saba, the 7 Principles of Kwanzaa. Dr. Karenga has been a leading advocate for the reaffirmation of African culture, values, and traditions as a means of resistance against cultural imperialism and oppression. His work has emphasized the importance of reclaiming African identity, consciousness, and agency in the struggle for liberation and social justice. Another influential figure is Dr. Marimba Ani, an anthropologist and author of the groundbreaking book Urugu, an African-centered critique of European cultural thought and behavior. Dr. Ani's scholarship provides a comprehensive analysis of the Eurocentric worldview and its impact on African people and global society. She challenges the notion that European logic is the standard by which all knowledge and experience should be measured, and she advocates for the restoration of African values, principles, and ethics as the foundation for authentic cultural expression and human flourishing. In addition, Dr. Alma Mazama, a professor and scholar, has been instrumental in promoting the concept of African-centered education and intellectual discourse. She has emphasized the importance of decolonizing the educational curriculum, challenging Eurocentric biases, and centering African perspectives in the production and dissemination of knowledge. Her work has contributed to the development of critical consciousness and cultural pride among students, educators, and communities worldwide. The impact of Sankofa before repatriation to Africa. The impact of Sankofa before repatriation to Africa is multifaceted and far-reaching. At the individual level, this approach has empowered people of African descent to confront internalized racism, self-hatred, and psychological trauma stemming from the colonial experience. By reconnecting with their ancestral heritage and cultural traditions, individuals have been able to cultivate a sense of belonging, purpose, and resilience. This has led to increased self-esteem, cultural pride, and a renewed commitment to collective upliftment and liberation. Furthermore, Sankofa before repatriation to Africa has influenced various domains of intellectual, artistic, and spiritual expression. In academia, there has been a growing movement to center African perspectives in research, teaching, and scholarship across disciplines. This has led to the emergence of African-centered educational institutions, intellectual networks, and cultural movements dedicated to reclaiming and advancing indigenous knowledge systems and epistemologies. In the arts, Sankofa before repatriation to Africa has fueled a renaissance of African cultural production, including music, literature, visual arts, and film. Artists have drawn inspiration from traditional African aesthetics, symbolism, and storytelling to create works that challenge dominant narratives and celebrate the richness and diversity of African heritage. This has contributed to the global visibility and appreciation of African creativity and innovation in the cultural landscape. Moreover, Sankofa before repatriation to Africa has revitalized spiritual practices and belief systems rooted in African cosmology and worldview. Traditional African religions, philosophies, and rituals have experienced a resurgence as people seek to reconnect with their ancestral spiritual legacy and reclaim their sacred connection to the natural world. This has deepened the sense of spiritual grounding, communal solidarity, and ethical guidance among African diasporic communities. Influential individuals. Throughout the development of the Sankofa before repatriation to Africa movement, numerous individuals have made significant contributions to its advancement. One such individual is Dr. Asa G. Hilliard III, an esteemed educator, psychologist, and historian who dedicated his life to the restoration and elevation of African culture, education, and identity. Dr. Hilliard's scholarship and advocacy have been instrumental in promoting African-centered pedagogy, psychological healing, and communal empowerment. His work has inspired educators, activists, and families to prioritize the holistic development and affirmation of African children and youth. Additionally, Dr. Molafai Kida Santi, a prolific scholar and founder of the first PhD program in African American Studies, has been a leading proponent of African-centered education and cultural critique. Dr. Asante's prolific writing, teaching, and activism have challenged the hegemony of Eurocentric scholarship and promoted the global recognition and respect of African civilization and contributions. He has been instrumental in shaping the field of Africology and fostering critical dialogue on the relevance of African cultural values and norms in contemporary society. Furthermore, Dr. Wade W. Nobles, a visionary psychologist and educator, has been a trailblazer in the field of African psychology and mental health. Dr. Noble's pioneering work has centered on the affirmation of African identity, wellness, and transformative healing practices. He has advocated for the integration of African cultural principles, traditional healing methods, and community-based interventions to address the psychological and emotional needs of people of African descent. His contributions have paved the way for a more holistic and culturally responsive approach to mental health and well-being. Positive aspects. One of the positive aspects of Sankofa before repatriation to Africa is its potential to foster intergenerational healing and reconciliation within African communities. By reclaiming and celebrating the diverse expressions of African culture, history, and spirituality, individuals can counteract the impact of historical trauma, disconnection, and fragmentation. This process can create a sense of continuity, solidarity, and purpose across generations and contribute to the restoration of collective agency and resilience. Another positive aspect is the role of Sankofa before repatriation to Africa in fostering transnational solidarity and collaboration among people of African descent. As individuals and communities relearn from an African perspective, they are able to recognize the interconnectedness of their struggles and aspirations with those of the global African diaspora. This shared consciousness and cultural revival can serve as a source of inspiration, support, and mutual empowerment in the pursuit of social justice, liberation, and self-determination. Moreover, Sankofa before repatriation to Africa has the potential to disrupt dominant narratives and power dynamics that have historically marginalized African knowledge and experiences. By challenging Eurocentric biases and validating African concepts with indigenous logic, individuals can promote epistemic diversity and equity in the production and dissemination of knowledge. This can lead to more inclusive, nuanced, and ethical representations of African heritage and realities in academic, media, and policy contexts. Negative aspects. Despite its transformative potential, Sankofa before repatriation to Africa is not without its challenges and limitations. One of the negative aspects is the resistance and pushback it may encounter from institutions, ideologies, and individuals invested in maintaining the status quo of cultural hegemony and exploitation. The reclamation of African heritage and identity poses a threat to systems of power and privilege that have been built on the devaluation and appropriation of African culture. As a result, Sankofa before repatriation to Africa may face institutional resistance, co-optation, and erasure. Furthermore, Sankofa before repatriation to Africa runs the risk of essentializing, romanticizing, or homogenizing diverse African experiences and perspectives. While seeking to relearn from an African perspective, individuals must also recognize the richness, complexity, and dynamism of African societies and histories. It is essential to avoid reducing African cultures to monolithic stereotypes or disregarding the internal diversity, tensions, and contradictions within African communities. This requires a nuanced and critical engagement with the multiplicity of voices, traditions, and struggles that shape the African continent and its diaspora. Additionally, Sankofa before repatriation to Africa may face challenges related to inclusivity, intersectionality, and social justice within the African diaspora. As individuals navigate the process of unlearning colonial ideologies and relearning African perspectives, they must prioritize equity, respect, and solidarity with marginalized and underrepresented communities. This means actively addressing issues of gender, sexuality, class, and other forms of oppression that intersect with race within the African diaspora. It also requires centering the voices and leadership of those most affected by systems of domination and exclusion. Future developments. Looking ahead, the future of Sankofa before repatriation to Africa holds the potential for continued expansion, innovation, and impact. As the movement grows, it is vital to cultivate intergenerational leadership, mentorship, and knowledge transmission within African communities. This will ensure the sustainability and relevance of Sankofa before repatriation to Africa for future generations, while fostering a sense of continuity and collective responsibility. Moreover, the future of Sankofa before repatriation to Africa will require the engagement and collaboration of diverse stakeholders, including scholars, activists, artists, educators, policymakers, and community organizers. By building networks of solidarity and mutual support, individuals can amplify their efforts to challenge colonial legacies, promote cultural revitalization, and advance social transformation. This will create opportunities for interdisciplinary dialogue, strategizing, and advocacy in the pursuit of justice and liberation. Furthermore, the future of Sankofa before repatriation to Africa will necessitate a sustained commitment to addressing the material, structural, and psychological impacts of colonization and global inequality. This includes advocating for reparations, land repatriation, environmental justice, and the redistribution of resources to benefit African communities and their diaspora. It also entails promoting ethical tourism, sustainable development, and community-led initiatives that honor and preserve African heritage, languages, and knowledge systems. In conclusion, Sankofa before repatriation to Africa represents a radical and necessary reclamation of African identity, agency, and sovereignty. By unlearning what has been learned from the colonizers and relearning from an African perspective, individuals can counteract the erasure and distortion of African history, culture, and knowledge. This approach challenges the notion that blackwashing information is enough and asserts the importance of validating African concepts without applying European logic. The historical context, key figures, impact, and influential individuals associated with Sankofa before repatriation to Africa have demonstrated its transformative potential in fostering intergenerational healing, transnational solidarity, and epistemic diversity. As the movement continues to evolve, it must address challenges related to institutional resistance, essentialism, and intersectional equity within the African diaspora. By cultivating intergenerational leadership, collaborative networks, and a commitment to justice, the future of Sankofa before repatriation to Africa holds the promise of social transformation, cultural revitalization, and global solidarity.